Okay, so this week what we're working with in Photoshop is the creation of an animated GIF. And you see animated GIFs used in a whole lot of different ways. A lot of those are for humor and, fun stuff to send in a text message or something like that. But they also have a professional use as well in web design. And mostly that is for creating an online ad, a banner ad or something like that that's going to go on a website. That's been what I've used it for the most from a professional perspective. Now and then you'll need one on a website for some reason or another. They used to be a lot more heavily used on in website design than they are now. But still, you will find that you'll have clients who ask you to create an animated GIF ad for them from time to time. It's a fairly common thing. But they're also just fun to build, and there's a lot of different ways that you can be creative with building those. And I put a couple of different things in the resources for this week in Blackboard related to cinemagraphs um, and also video clips for animated GIFs. But you can also do a frame by frame animation, kind of like if you draw a flipbook animation or something like that, a frame by frame animated GIF. So that's what I'm going to show you how to build now. Uh, and so to get that set up, I'm going to take a couple of pictures that are also in Blackboard for this week that I'm going to use as the basis for this. So I'm going to start out with this picture of Abraham Lincoln. And I'm just going to set this up so it's got kind of an interesting look to it before I do anything else, using some techniques that we've already covered before. So the first thing I'm going to do is use this quick selection tool and use select subject. And this we've done before. This is going to try to figure out what the subject of the photo is and select it. And it does a really good job except for in two spots, the ear and below the ear right here. So using the add mode of the quick selection tool, I'm just going to drag over that spot of the ear that didn't get included. And then I'm going to hold Option, which temporarily is going to put it into the subtract mode there, as long as I'm holding the Option down, and click right there to remove that chunk from the selection. And then we use Select and Mask so I can see what got selected. This looks pretty good. You can see up here in the hair, it looks kind of chunky, and also in the beard around here, it looks chunky. There's a setting in the select and mask dialog that we haven't talked about, which is this edge detection right here. Edge detection it asks Photoshop to kind of figure out what the edge should look like. Should it be a kind of sharp edge like the edge of his jacket, or a kind of a fuzzy edge where there's hair? How kind of crisp should that edge be? And we can drag that around a little bit and watch those edges and see the beard's kind of softened now, and this hair up here is softened a little bit. If I go too far, it gets real fuzzy around the edges, looks kind of weird. I can also click this Smart Radius button, and Photoshop tries to figure out on its own where it should be sharper or fuzzier or whatever. So I'm just going to get something that I think looks decent right there. And this is starting to get weird in the ear, but looks pretty good in the beard. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And down here in the output area, I'm going to make a different setting here, which is new layer with layer mask. And I'll show you why I'm going to select that after I click OK, but I'm choosing new layer with layer mask. So what that does in my layers panel is it adds the layer mask here, and we've looked at these before also. So it adds this layer mask to hide the background and leave the subject in this image. But it did that by creating a new layer. You see the background copy, and leaving the original layer with no change made to it, but it's hidden. So I'm going to click the visibility icon right there to make that show. And so now if I use the move tool and move Abe over, I have a cutout copy of Abe Lincoln directly on top of the original image. I'm going to undo that, put it back. But I've got these two layers right here, one with cutout Abe and the other with the original background. And just to have something kind of cool to look at here, I'm going to type his name in. And make some changes to that to get it to kind of look the way that I want it to. So first thing I'm going to do is change the size of the type a little, and those two lines of text are too close together, so I'm going to use the leading here to get those not overlapping. And then I'm going to use the free transform command, which usually I use with Command T, and just really stretch this to cover that whole background area, kind of like that. Check mark up here, press return, and then change my stacking order over here to move that between those two layers. So now I got this Abraham Lincoln text that's behind the picture of Lincoln. And just to make that look a little more interesting, I'll put a drop shadow on the text. I'm just leave those settings at their default and click OK. So now I've got 3 layers in the document. I've got the original picture, then the Abraham Lincoln text with the drop shadow, and Abe sitting out there in front of there. Now this, so far, isn't really doing anything related to creating an animated GIF. It's just putting together kind of an interesting looking thing in Photoshop to play around with. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I'll save that. I'm gonna save as and save it as Lincoln working. So I have a copy. And I'm going to add one more file to this, similar to what we've already done before. So I'm going to open up this other file, the sunglasses file, and do the same step on that. Use the quick selection tool and select the subject. And it does something kind of weird here. It selects the sunglasses and part of the lenses, but it leaves part of the lenses untouched. So I'll use the quick selection tool and make sure that all of those lenses are included in my selection. So got those added in. Now I can click select and mask there and make sure it looks good. It looks great. And this time I'm just going to use for the output to, I'm going to choose layer mask. I don't need a new layer, just layer mask. And click OK. So now I've got these sunglasses isolated from their background. And I'm going to move those over to the Lincoln image. And I'm pretty sure that I've shown you this before. I can use the window menu and arrange to arrange these 2 up vertical so that I can just drag the sunglasses over into this picture like this. So that's one way I can do this. I'm going to undo that because I want to show you another way just in case we haven't looked already. I'm going to put all of those windows back into tabs the way they were before. That's window, arrange, consolidate all to tabs. So that I have sunglasses in one tab and my Lincoln working file in another. And this time I'm going to just drag the sunglasses up to the Lincoln tab here and then down into the picture. I'm going to hold the shift key while I let go. And that'll just stick those sunglasses right in the middle of the layout. So that's what I do most of the time is drag from one image to the tab of the other and drag it down to put it into that other image. And I want these to be in front of his face, so I'll drag them up in the layers panel so they're in front. And they're way too big, so I'm going to use that free transform mode. I'm going to use Command T keyboard shortcut to use that transformation mode. So Command T and resize those down. And usually when I resize like this, I use a couple of key commands as I'm doing that, which is Option and Shift. The Shift keeps the proportions so that the sunglasses don't get stretched, and the Option resizes towards the center. When I do both of those together, Option and Shift, it'll resize down to the center and keep the proportions right. So I can Option Shift, drag down. And these look like they need to be rotated a little bit too, so I'll just move my cursor out here to the corner, rotate them over just a hair, and get them in the right spot. Hit the check mark or press return. Maybe nudge them with the arrow keys a little bit. Okay, so now I've got a pretty decent little picture of Lincoln wearing these sunglasses. And I can turn those on and off like this. Now, what we're going to do is create an animation, and the animation is created frame by frame. So to create the animation, generally what you do is you set up your layers so that you can show the image in each frame of the illustration that you'd want it to have. So for instance, let's say that I wanted this to start like this and for my animation to take these steps. text, Abe, sunglasses, show up, and then disappear again. Uh, I've got my layers set up so that I can change it like that. I can make each step or each frame in my animation appear the way that I want them to appear. So I can go ahead and build that animation with the animations panel or the timeline panel in Photoshop right now. So this will be just an example. This is not the end animation I'm going to create, but it'll give us a look at how this works. So to do that, I need the timeline panel, and that's under the window menu. And down here towards the bottom, I have timeline. And when you're working in Photoshop, there's two different ways that you can create animation and work with the timeline in your file. And the default is this video timeline, but we want a frame animation. For what we're doing, that's going to be an easier method to use. So you hit this drop down right here and make sure that create frame animation is selected. You should see create frame animation right here. And then you just click that button and it sets up your timeline here. And this can be a little confusing, especially depending on what you try to do with it. It'll do some weird stuff sometimes. So as you experiment with it, you'll see that there are some limitations to the way that this works, and it's very easy to get your animation kind of screwed up because you didn't follow the steps in the right order, that sort of thing. It takes a little while to get used to it, but it's a pretty simple method. And the way that it works is we're going to create frames down here that show us each step of the way that we want this image to look. So as a very basic example, right now I have the image that looks like this, and I'm going to make a new frame. Click in this new frame, duplicate selected frame. That'll create a new frame. And so now it made a duplicate of the frame that was already there, and I now have two frames. And so in the second frame, I'm going to change my layers so that it looks like I want it to look in the second frame. So now if I click on frame 1, he's got the sunglasses on. Frame 2, he's got them off. And now I've got an animation. So if I want to press the play button right here and see what will happen if that animation runs. And there's some control over that too. For instance, I can have his image with the sunglasses on display for 1 second and the image with the sunglasses off display for 2 seconds. Now let me play that. Sunglasses on, sunglasses off, sunglasses on, sunglasses off. So we have control over the frames, the length of time down here in these drop downs below. Or I can have no delay like this. We'll look at some more of these controls down here as we go along, but I'm going to go ahead and delete this frame just by pressing that little trash can to get back to the beginning. And I'm going to do that animation I was talking about before. So I'll start with just the background, make a new frame, turn on the text, make a new frame, turn on Abe, new frame, and turn on sunglasses. So then I can see what that looks like. Kind of getting crazy. I can stop that, and maybe I want, when it's finished, I want that to pause for 2 seconds. So now let's see what that looks like. I'm getting some pause in there just because of my processor on my computer is hanging up a little bit. I'm going to stop that. And right here, I also have this ability to loop a certain number of times. So for instance, if I start back at the beginning, set my loop to once and press play, it only goes through the animation one time and it stops on the last frame, sticks that way. So if I was going to do that, maybe I'd set this one to 2 seconds. I'll start back at the beginning, play it, 2 second delay on the text, and then here he comes with the shades and that stops. I can also do custom number of repeats. I can do a 3-time repeat, or I can choose other and have it play any number of times. Let's say 2. So then if I start at the beginning and play that, it gives me a 2-second delay with the text, 2-second delay with the shades, back to a 2-second delay with the text, 2 seconds with the shades, and now it's repeated 2 times. So now it's just going to stop. So you have a lot of control over the loops here. I'm going to set it back to forever. Set these back to no delay. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and delete these frames. And turn all my layers back on, and I'll give you one more example of how I might build an animation here. So one of the things that you have to watch out for is, let's say that I want these shades to change colors. So I've got the green shades. I make a new frame, and then with this layer selected, image, adjustments, hue, saturation, and that lets me change the color of the shades. This hue, saturation adjustment, pretty good for that. So I'm going to make the shades this dark blue, and I'll click OK. Green lenses, blue shades. Well, if I look at my two frames, they both have blue shades. And that's because that hue and saturation adjustment that I made applies to these pixels in all of the frames. So I can't go through and make that kind of adjustment on each different frame and have it stick. So I'm going to undo that, undo my hue and saturation adjustment. And so now I'm back to the green shades. And if I want the shades to change color, since I can't change the color on the shades themselves, or at least not in this one layer, I'm going to make some copies of this layer so I can have shades of different colors. So to do that, I'm basically going to duplicate this layer, which I could do by right clicking or control clicking on the layer and choosing somewhere in here, duplicate layer right here. I can do it that way. The way that I usually do it is just select the layer that I want to copy and press Command and J, or Control J on a PC, Command J. And that gives me a new copy of the shades. If I were to move it over, two copies of the shades. So I have two layers with the shades on them. And then I'm going to do that same image, adjustments, hue and saturation, and change the color to the blue. So now I have the green shades on one layer, the blue shades on another. And I should have deleted that second frame in the timeline. I only want to have one frame while I'm getting everything set up here. But I have two layers of sunglasses here, one with green, one with blue. And I'm going to go ahead and press Command J again and use the adjustment hue saturation. There's a Command U keyboard shortcut for that I could use. And this time I've got green, I've got blue. Maybe I'll go for, can I do red? There's red. And I'm going to do Command J again and Command U for hue and saturation. I've got green, blue. I'm going to do this purple right here. Okay, so green shades, blue shades, red shades, purple shades. I've got four different layers here that represent the four different ways that I want this to look. And so now, back in my timeline down here at the bottom, I've got my original frame, which looks like this with the green shades. Hit the duplicate new button here. Turn on a different color. New again, different color. New again, different color. And now if I press play, get this crazy blinking sunglasses situation going on. I'm going to stop that. But that gives me the ability to have these shades show up in all different colors. And I'm actually going to add one more frame to go back to green. So now I have 5 frames. Green, blue, red, purple, back to green. If I play those, they just loop around like this. So that's one way to create the animation, is just have your layers set up in a way that represents the way that you want these frames to look. But there's another thing you can do to add a little bit of movement or motion to the animation that you're building, and that's called tweening. And you may have heard of tweening before. Tweening is when you create the beginning and the end points of some kind of change, and the computer automatically creates the frames between the beginning and the end. So, for example, let's say that after this last frame, so I want him to go through the different colors of lenses, and after this last frame, I want sunglasses to shoot off of his face. To do that, I've got the starting location. I want them to start right here on his face, but then I want them to end over here to the left somewhere. So I'm going to make a new frame, and then I'm going to move the shades. Oh, got the wrong layer selected. I'm going to move the shades off the page over here to the left. Try that one more time. All right, so now I've got shades on, shades off, scooted over to the left. And so what I want the computer to do is automatically create a couple of frames in here to make them move off. So I'm going to click this little button right here. I've got the last frame. Here are my two frames, start and end. I'm going to click the last frame, click this little button right here, and this is the tween dialog box. And right now I've got the number 2 in there. It's going to add 2 frames between these 2 frames. It's going to add 2 more. And it's going to pay attention to the position, opacity, and effects of all the layers. So when I click OK, you see that it added 2 frames in here. So here's my original position. Here's the moved position. And it added this frame and this frame with the sunglasses moved over. So that now when I start here and run the animation, the glasses blink on his face, and then they scooch off. So I've got kind of some movement in the animation. And what I'd actually like to happen here is that at the beginning of the animation, they shoot onto his face from the right-hand side. So let's try to set that up, and I want to show you one problem you have to watch out for when we do that. So I've got 8 frames now, the changing colors, and then the moving off of the face. But at the beginning of the timeline, I want to have the sunglasses start over here and move to his face. So I'm going to create a new frame, a duplicate here. So now these first 2 frames are exactly the same. And on frame 1, I want the sunglasses to move over here off the right-hand side of the screen. Now, look what happens by doing that. If I look at frame 2, the sunglasses are over here to the right. And even over here on those later frames, they're in the wrong spot. So unfortunately, I'm going to undo that move. I might step backward in my history to do that. If I change the first frame in the timeline, it will change all of the other frames that were based on that same layout. So it can create some issues there. So I'm going to do this in a little bit of a different way. I'm going to go to frame 2 and move the sunglasses over on that one. So now I've got frame 1, frame 2, they're scooted over to the right, and then switch colors, and then they're back moving where I want them out here. But frame 1 and frame 2, well, I actually want where they end on his face, I want that to be the end point, not the start point of the tween. And frame 2, with him over here to the right, I want that to be the start, not the end. But right now in the frames, they're set up swapped, that the place I want it to end is actually where it starts. So I'm just going to take frame 2 and drag it to frame 1, so that now I have those organized correctly. And I just had to do that so that it wouldn't mess up these other frames out here later when I made a change to what I want to be the first frame. So now I've got frame 1, the shades are over here. Frame 2, sitting right on the face. And then I'll go on through the rest of the thing like this. And so now I'm going to just do that same tween. I'll select the second frame, the end point that I want, hit the tween button. It's going to tween with the previous frame, the one in front of it. And this time I'm going to add a few more frames so that, because it's got a greater distance to cover, so I want it to take more steps as it goes across here so it looks smoother. So I'll add 5 frames and click OK. And so now the glasses are off the face, and then they move across until they're on the face. And then they go through the rest of the animation. So let's start at the beginning and see what that looks like. So now I have the glasses fly over from the side, land on his face, and then fly off. Now I'm going to do one more thing and then I'm going to be done with this animation. So I've got this section in here of 4 frames of the 4 different colors of the glasses. And I'm going to see what happens if I select those 4 frames, the green, blue, red, and purple sunglasses. I've selected all 4 of those, and I'm just going to duplicate those. So it sticks a copy of those right after the spot where I had them selected. So I can copy more than one frame at once. And so now if I go back to the beginning and run through it, it blinks for twice as long over his face there because I put twice as many frames of the color changing in front of his face. Okay, so that's the pretty much all of the controls down here. You can see that you've got some control over moving to the next frame, moving to the previous frame, moving back to the beginning. So I can step through the frames if I want to, or jump back to the beginning here. And that pretty much covers the timeline panel for making a frame animation like this. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. If you kind of experiment with it some, you can get pretty creative with what you're doing. Once you complete the animation and you're ready to see how it looks, I'm going to save my work. And I'm going to use that um, Save for Web dialog box that we've used before. Just Command Option Shift and S for the keyboard shortcut, or use the menu command. And then make sure that you save it as a GIF. Let's see if GIF 64 dithered looks good. Looks a little funky in his face. Maybe 128 dithered. That looks a lot better. Um, and then I'm just going to go ahead and save it. Let me make sure I put that on my desktop. So that will export that as a GIF on the desktop here. There it is. And if I view that file, now I've got an animated GIF that I can upload to a website or do anything that I want to like that. Okay, so that's the basic animated GIF controls in working in Photoshop. The lab assignment I have for you this week is to basically duplicate this using the files that I provided. So you're going to kind of go right through what I just demonstrated here and build that yourself. And then there's a homework assignment there for you too for creating a animated GIF of your own. Um, Let me know if you have any questions about this in the general questions forum on Blackboard. But otherwise, enjoy creating some animated GIFs.